Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You have reached the No Name Cinema Society. It is time for our classic movie discussion, which tonight will be Orson Welles' film, The Magnificent Ambersons. It is the 52nd time that we've done a classic movie discussion, episode 52.3. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jonathan Betzler. I'm one of your hosts here this evening. I'm here in Los Angeles with my buddy Humphrey Bogart, who always tends to be with me when we're talking about films from 1942, which we've done a lot of recently. As many of you know, one of our big finale episodes from last year took a look at the Oscar race from 1942, which was 75 years before 2017, sort of celebrating the anniversary of those films. But in this year, I made some of my other co-hosts watch those films that weren't a part of that show. And we've dissected a few other ones a little more closely than we had the opportunity to in the show, including on episode 47.3, we talked about the Best Picture winner of that year, Mrs. Miniver. And just a couple classics ago, episode 50.3, we did Sam Wood's Pride of the Yankees. Of course, tonight, we're talking about Orson Welles' Magnificent Ambersons, which, by the way, was his follow-up to Citizen Kane. And for this discussion with me tonight is, first of all, a pompous heir who will likely blow all his family's fortune. It's the old standby, ladies and gentlemen, Drunk Davie.
How you doing?
Davie, I had some reports that you keep checking your emails and work emails during the show. Is that going to happen tonight?
Absolutely.
No interest in cutting it down for the fans? They're complaining, Davie.
Well, if the fans want to subscribe to the channel, maybe I'd start caring.
Okay, this is all his idea, ladies and gentlemen. This is his channel. And our other co-host is a queer-looking duck, but he's a brilliant and charismatic inventor. Patrick Taylor is back.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Patrick, we worked together about 6 weeks ago, a couple months ago, and my question for you is, where the hell is my check?
Your check is in the mail. Actually, people definitely got their checks today. If you didn't get it, maybe you didn't earn it. You know, maybe.
I see how it goes. All right. It's going to be a lively discussion tonight. I can see. So here is our schedule, by the way, of our 52nd set of episodes, which started a week ago to tonight with our discussion of Peppermint from director Pierre Morel. Just this past Monday, September 17th, we talked about Joss Whedon's film version of Much Ado About Nothing. Tonight, of course, is Orson Welles' The Magnificent Ambersons. Coming up this Monday, September 24th, will be our 36th sound-off, in which we're going to bring back the very popular movie game. I'm going to spotlight another character actor in our What's Their Bucket segment. And Davey has asked me to count down the top 5 adaptations of Pulitzer Prize winners. And that includes novels and plays. That could be a really interesting top 5 coming up this Monday. All right, so it's time for What Are We Drinking? Patrick, are you going to drink with me tonight?
Yes. I have a classic Tecate.
And I've got the same thing I've got for most of the set of episodes. I've got Lagunitas Maximus. Light's a little bright there, but so it's a different kind of IPA. Are you popping yours now? So Patrick, thanks for coming back. Your 4th show. Cheers to you. Patrick, it's also your first classic, so I'm excited about that.
Yes, I am excited too.
All right, so here was your trivia for tonight's episode, and it required you watching the 1942 in review, because your trivia tidbit was, this is the film that Jim and I both named the film that should have won the Best Director Oscar in 1942. Wasn't even nominated, but both Jim and I felt it was the best direction of 1942. Of course, talking about The Magnificent Ambersons. William Wyler would win the award for Mrs. Miniver, which, of course, we reviewed in episode 47.3. Other nominees that year included John Farrow for Wake Island, who you may remember I said should have won out of the 5 nominees. Sam Wood for King's Row, same director, by the way, as Pride of the Yankees. Michael Curtiz for Yankee Doodle Dandy was nominated, same director as Casablanca, and he would win the following year for that film. And Mervyn LeRoy for Random Harvest. Those were the nominees, along with William Wyler, of course. So Orson Welles was not on that list, but both Jim and I feel that he should have not only been nominated, but he should have won. Additional trivia tidbit that I wanted to let you guys know, and maybe also let my buddies know here, because maybe they don't know some of this backstory. George alluded to this on our 1942 review, the story behind The Magnificent Ambersons and the destruction of the film ultimately. The original cut by Orson Welles was 132 minutes, and he basically considered it a finished product. He went off to Brazil to make a film called It Isn't True as part of FDR's Good Neighbor policy, looking to have good relations with South America. While he was gone, RKO, the studio, recut the film down to 88 minutes and tacked on a happy ending that was not part of Welles' initial vision. The footage they took away from the film, including the original negative, was then burnt as was studio policy back in those days. Orson Welles' version of the film was never seen and remains one of the long-lost treasures of cinema history. Welles himself felt Ambersons would have been even better than Citizen Kane. There are many, including his friend and Last Picture Show director Peter Bogdanovich, who feel that even this current version is better than Citizen Kane. That group that prefers Ambersons is growing every day. Welles cites the butchering of The Magnificent Ambersons as the line that divides his career. Astronomical success before it and mostly financial ruin afterward. He still had a couple more masterpieces in him, Touch of Evil, Othello, The Stranger, Chimes of Midnight, but after the Ambersons debacle, the shine on the boy wonder was gone for good. That's part of the story behind Magnificent Ambersons and sort of setting up the film for the discussion this evening, part of the trivia tidbit. Davie or Patrick, did any of you guys know any of that stuff?
No, I didn't know that at all, but now that I hear it, the ending makes a whole lot more sense.
Davie, was that news to you?
No, I knew that. And it was one of the things that always kind of kept me from watching the movie.
All right, interesting. It's time for summary. You guys ready?
Yeah!
That's what I'm talking about. Davie, can't you bring some of that enthusiasm?
Sure.
There's something to be said for consistency, ladies and gentlemen, I have to say. All right, the Magnificent Ambersons. The Ambersons are the wealthiest and most influential family in Indianapolis, Indiana at the turn of the century, the subject of the townspeople's idolatry, gossip, jealousy, and enmity. Young George Amberson Minifer is the heir to the fortune, but his spoiled nature makes him look down on everything and everyone that doesn't measure up to the magnificence of his family. This worldview gets thrown into disarray when he falls for Lucy Morgan, the beautiful daughter of an uppity inventor who dares to shake up the status quo with his nuisance of an invention, the automobile. This same Mr. Morgan also had the gall to be in love with George's mother years before, further enhancing George's disgust for the father of the girl he wants to marry and the symbol of everything he hates. Guys, it was a hard summary. How did I do?
Very good.
Very well. I liked it.
It's time for opening thoughts. And as per tradition, my monosyllabic friend goes first. Davie, your first time seeing Magnificent Ambersons.
Yeah, I'd say it's efficient.
Where does that land on the Davie scale, I wonder?
It's a good movie.
Sounds good. Patrick, your turn. Opening thoughts.
Strange ending, great cinematography, good movie. Really liked it.
And I screened this film about 9 months ago on December 9th, 2017. I re-listened to the discussion, the after-movie discussion today. I recorded it for posterity. And I hate to say it's one of the worst after-movie discussions we've ever had. Alex was there. Alex is a member of the society. And as he tends to do in the show sometimes, he was pivotal on sending us on many tangents. Like, for example, the history of fainting was a long discussion in the middle of that. It was not the most productive after-movie discussion. It was overall, I would say, that as far as the movie's concerned, it was a very mixed response. One person in the group called it a failure as a motion picture. That's a quote. Others felt it was really engaging and appreciated the outstanding craftsmanship. As far as I'm concerned, I consider the film hypnotically cinematic, a mostly great ensemble, surprisingly compelling, an incomplete masterpiece. Incomplete enough to be my number 6 movie of 1942, even though I suggested it should win the Best Director Oscar. Out of 1942, all the films that I saw, I had it should have been nominated for 5 Oscars and winning 2. It should have been nominated for Best Picture, and it was nominated for Best Picture, actually. Should have won Best Director, should have won Best Cinematography, and should have been nominated for both Best Costume Design and Best Production Design. But since Jim and I both feel like direction was its strength, we'll start with there, and I'll play a little clip. This is what Jim had to say about the direction of Magnificent Ambersons.
I didn't like it as much as I liked the directing. It felt to me the most modern of all the films in the way that he pulled it from the very opening sequence. I think the directing is the strongest part of that, and it kept me coming back and engaged. And the story was what kept pushing me away. So guys, how do you feel about Jim's statement?
No, I think that's an interesting point. There's always going to be something to latch onto with this film. If you're not interested in the story, there's just performances that you can get into, incredible shot selection. It's a multifaceted film, and that's probably what makes it so great.
I just thought the banter between some of the characters felt authentic. There's only one character that kind of just grated on me. I really liked the dialogue, and I really loved their framing. Some of their lighting choices were just beautiful.
Yeah, and I agree, and that's why I thought he was Best Director of 1941 and also Best Director of 1942. I think one of the strengths of the film and Citizen Kane is the blocking for the camera. And there's a certain theatricality, and of course that's Wells's background. There's a certain theatricality to the way he stages it. He doesn't have a lot of edits in the film. I mean, he tends to do long shots, and the actors would work within the confines of the camera. That is their stage. And yet few directors make this theatrical technique as cinematic as Wells does. And the way he uses it mainly is his use of depth, using the whole stage, all the planes of the frame. A technique he mastered in Citizen Kane, but admittedly, it's a lot less in your face here. And whether that's good or bad, I'll leave up to these guys. And also, I thought it was interesting that he frequently uses George as foreground, which one of the audience members at our screening pointed out was very frustrated by, because sometimes George would be his back to the camera. I thought it was a great concept. George is the apex of the story. We were discovering events through George to some degree, similar to the way that we do through Thompson, a reporter character in Citizen Kane. Dave, you talked about this a little bit, the blocking for the camera. What do you think?
I agree. The scene where he goes to confront the neighbor, he just walks through the door and it's just like a long shot of his back. And you can just tell that he's angry. I don't know how I guess you know, but it's the performance as well as the shot. It's amazing how Orson Welles made little things like that so interesting. Just the guy walking through a door.
Michael Mann is another one, and Darren Aronofsky are other ones that have recently done a lot of stuff showing people's backs. Somehow there's a certain mystery to that. I think about the scene where he's saying goodbye towards the end to his uncle, the congressman. It's all one long shot, and he doesn't say a word in it, and it's just his back. When there's something mysterious, because that's when, if George's shifting, that's when he's starting to shift. Patrick, what about the blocking and the depth of the camera?
Well, I mean, I really thought that whoever was designing the sets was, there was a scene where they're walking up the stairs and he stops, and it's almost like the windows of the house kind of frame him in a saintly kind of way as he's yelling at his aunt. How they used the set and how they designed the set was beautiful. I mean, just like you were saying, the interior depth, like when you looked behind the actors and you saw the chandeliers and you saw how pristine the room looked behind them. There was one shot in particular where there's 3 people sitting on a couch, and it was just a long shot of just them sitting on the couch just talking. You start looking around and you're like, this is a beautiful room. Very, very skilled. And then some of their wide shots, when you were looking down into the mansion and you saw them kind of walking into the scene. I just thought it was just beautiful. Some of the frames, you could just take a picture and frame them.
Yeah, and that's true of Citizen Kane as well. And yeah, I completely agree. And you talked a little bit about this. Light versus shadow was really groundbreaking to some degree because he's so unafraid to let characters move through darkness. And it adds a gothic quality to this family drama, perhaps symbolizing the light of the future and how the shadows of the past can consume us. Or perhaps even vice versa, depending on your interpretation of the film. And that ambiguity is one of my favorite qualities of the film. And the other thing is camera movement that you alluded to a little bit. I thought that's where you're going to go when you're talking about that staircase scene. There is so many really impressive dolly and crane shots, years and years ahead of its time. I think about that scene craning up the stairs with Fanny and George as they're walking up. And it's not showy. It just sort of moves up with them. Of course, the dancing sequence in the first ball that they have, or I guess it's the only ball in the film, is, as we move through who's dancing in the rooms, is just great work. This is 30 years before Steadicam is even thought of. And also riding alongside Lucy and George in the horse and carriage, moving along with them. Patrick, it's almost as if they had a process trailer or something. Like, I don't know how they did that.
It was a set, right? They stayed in shade the whole time. What I noticed in that particular scene was I was like, they are perfectly lit. They're not going in and out of sun. So it must be a set on the other side of the camera. I don't know how they were doing it, but it was such a long shot. I was very impressed with that one scene. There was also one scene where they were in the dark almost. The woman was walking almost in the dark, lit almost by kind of like a candlelight. And it was very impressive how they just stayed in the darkness. They didn't even try to give her light, but she was kind of lit. It just pulled you in.
And the other one I was going to refer to is the one where George is sort of helping hysterical Fanny. Like, they go through 6 rooms and the camera sort of stays in front of them in one long take the whole time. Just really like amazing work. From a blocking and cinematography standpoint. Davey, light, shadow, camera movement. What are your thoughts on these things?
Yeah, that last scene that you mentioned is the one that I was thinking of too, because it definitely, it starts dark and then it gets darker, but it's still I don't know, it still just works, and it's I guess it's just a function of him using light as sort of a reflection of the mood. and it really worked. It really worked. That scene was powerful.
Alex, who was at the screening, who Davie knows but Patrick doesn't, he felt the camera movement was largely unmotivated. I kind of felt like the characters were frequently moving during that, so that seemed motivated by their movement. How do you guys respond to Alex?
It felt natural to me, in a sense that, you know, it was easy to just get involved in the shot, or get involved in the film and not realize the complexity of what was going on with the camera. But those, I think that's sometimes the beauty of the long shot, when it's not, it's cool as a gimmick sometimes, and a gimmick is a loaded term, but like we've seen some modern day films where they've really made a point at a stretching out shots like that. But when you don't notice it necessarily is, to me, when it's at its best.
That's the one thing when I think about Citizen Kane and comparing the two, is the Magnificent Ambersons, the filmmaking flows a little more. Like Citizen Kane is showy. It's a great film, don't get me wrong. It's an all-time favorite. It is flashy in its own way. And everything works, everything's motivated. It shouldn't not be. But there's something about the Magnificent Ambersons that the filmmaking and all the style choices are less in your face, was the phrase I used earlier.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. It doesn't get in the way of the film, which is an odd way of stating it. I think you know what I mean.
And I think it's one of the reasons why Bogdanovich prefers Ambersons. Maybe he's just rooting for an underdog to some degree too. But Patrick, have you seen Citizen Kane?
I haven't seen it for years, so I couldn't really make the comparison. But sometimes I watch older films and I feel like it's too slow. This one wasn't faster, but I was engaged. I was in the scenes with the characters. So I didn't feel like they needed to cut away. I was with the film.
It's the way he blocks them. It's the way he uses, right. I think it's all about the depth. He's using the whole image. You're constantly engaged. I think that's one of the things that Wells was a pioneer in. The other thing that Patrick also alluded to, because he liked to jump ahead, is I also wanted to give a shout out to the design elements, both of which I think should have been nominated for Oscars, but the costumes and the sets. The costumes was kind of funny because they almost, in the beginning, they sort of paraded the costumes for us as they were sort of going over the change of wardrobe of the period and how it evolved. I also think the costumes weren't just strong because of historical accuracy, but also for character specificity. The stark contrast, for example, between Isabel's wardrobe and Fanny's. You guys have anything more about the costumes?
Costume-wise, I was in the period, so I didn't really take terrible note of the costumes. It was really the sets that made me excited.
I'll talk about the sets. The big standouts to me is the downtown Indianapolis during that car ride. Amazing detail in the sets, and a humongous set for them to move as long as they did in a solitary shot. It doesn't matter how long it took to build or create, but I mean, it just isn't. As someone who works on sets, like as you do, Patrick, it's so impressive just think about. And also the Amberson house itself, just a magnificent set. All the rooms were so detailed and creative and period specific. Gorgeous.
Yeah. The center area being completely open to rooms wrapping around the staircase so that you could look from any angle up, down, into the house. And the way that they use some of the conversations on the stairs, but not just the one that I was talking about. There's another conversation between the son and the aunt. Some of those angles and the backgrounds of those angles, it was just motivational almost. But I don't know where we would ever get that kind of money to build a set like that. But it was great.
Davie, sets and costumes.
Sets definitely. I want to echo everything that you've said, and just like the little things in the kitchen, the pitcher of milk, and just the way it was positioned and the lighting of it. I don't know, maybe I get into a movie and I start making things up to glorify it. The little details early in the film, the car, because cars are such an important part of the film.
Oh yeah.
They took the time to have a pretty awesome car.
Baby, I got good news for you. I've got that car for you for your upcoming birthday on November 30th, so that car is now yours.
Yay!
Good luck driving that around New York City. We often give the director credit if largely the performances of the movie are strong. And I do think the ensemble of this movie is terrific, featuring many of his Mercury players. Love or hate the performances, and we're about to get into them because they were controversial at our screen as well. Love or hate them, you have to admit they are all in line with the vision of the film. Patrick, before we talk about individuals, do you at least agree with that statement?
I did like the acting in this movie. I really did. Each person You knew where they were coming from, how they responded to this situations. Like the lead character was like a snarky asshole, but he was like good at it. The aunt was like a manipulative, kind of cunning woman, and she is that person, it feels like.
Do you like, ladies and gentlemen, how I asked him not to get into individual performances?
Is that what you meant? Okay, well, generally, I didn't say how much I hated them, but they were good in their performances.
And that's the overall point. Davey, do you also agree with at least overall the performances were across the board compelling?
Oh yeah, I that's not a controversial statement, at least in my book. I think, yeah, for sure.
Well, it was at our screening because there were a couple of performances that got really, really strongly discussed, and one of them will start with Tim Holt here, who plays George Minifer. Also, fun little side tangent. Isn't it fun? 1942, Miniver and Minifer.
I did pick up on that. I was like, whoa, that's gonna get a month from now. That's gonna be confusing.
Anyway, Tim Holt, who plays George Amberson Minifer. A lot of discussion about him at the screening. The audience hated him, but had trouble, I feel, really distinguishing the character from the performance. Yeah. Obviously, we are meant as an audience to hate George. He's shallow and stupid to the ways of the world, and that's how Holt plays him, as someone almost out of step with the rest of the world that's passing him by. He played the character as a petulant young boy, which rings true for me. I don't think it's a standout performance, and I don't think it's an Oscar-worthy performance, but I think it's a solid performance. I think it's what Wells wanted in keeping with his vision. Patrick?
I liked him. The way he played it was kind of a modern-day asshole.
Are you saying he based the character on Davie?
No, Davie is dry. This guy is trying to be a jerk. This guy...
It comes naturally.
Right. He's just a jerk. I thought that his sarcasm was I could agree, I could get along with that kind of sarcasm and that kind of dick-headedness. You know, it's kind of why I'm probably JB's friend.
It helps.
It helps, right? But I didn't.
If I dish it out, I gotta take it as well. Do you have anything on Tim Holt, Davie?
Yeah, I like it a lot, and you know, I think it's easy to, the fact that a lot of people didn't, I think almost proves that he was doing a good job.
Davey's got a work email that just came in. Let's pause the show, everybody. Let's look at the... Oh, geez.
Wait, this isn't paying the bills? What's going on over there, man?
No, it's someone's, that's not even, that's Facebook Messenger. How do I make that stop?
You close Facebook.
No, it's not open. Notifications are on. I mean, he is trying to come across as a petulant, immature person. It worked. I think it was a great performance, and I think the fact that it put some people off is kind of a testament to how effective it was. He's playing a petulant and immature character, and that's supposed to annoy people, and it worked.
Let's move on to talk about some of the other performances. Let's talk about Joseph Cotten for a little bit. A little tidbit, Davey. I want to see if you caught this. Towards the end of the movie, Joseph Cotten is learning about George's accident in the newspaper. Did you remember that scene?
Yeah.
And you recognize Joseph Cotten from Citizen Kane, right?
Mm-hmm.
On the left side of the page of the newspaper, there's a little column that says "Stage Views" by Jed Leland.
Oh, I missed that.
Isn't that kind of a fun Easter egg? Which is the same character, the same actor played in Citizen Kane, and he's reading the newspaper.
Ah, damn! I would have loved to have noticed that.
It's pretty cool stuff. But about Joseph Cotten, it's not as much of a showy role as Jed Leland, but there's something about the way that Cotten plays the quiet longing of Eugene that makes the character very memorable. One person in my audience wished the movie was more about the Morgans, and I think Cotten is a big reason why. Davey, you can go first on Joseph Cotten.
It was a cool character and a good performance, and the way he played it, it kind of leaves you wanting more. It was efficient.
Also, the fact that the original film was 44 minutes longer.
I hate this because, I wanted to be critical. I hate the fact that I feel like maybe they helped it.
Well, except I think we all agree the ending was pretty crappy. You do agree with that, right, Davey? The last scene?
I don't hate the ending. It feels tacked on.
That's why we hate it.
I like an ending that I don't necessarily see coming.
Neither did Orson Welles.
That's what I mean.
So, Patrick, Joseph Cotten.
I really enjoyed his performance also, though there was one scene that I want to ask a question about, which is at the end in the newspaper. He kind of gives a little smirk, like he's a little happy that he got hurt. Did anyone else pick up on that?
I didn't interpret it that way. I interpreted it as he saw the opportunity to reconnect with his love that had passed on through him. What I saw in that smirk was hope for the future and George's future.
I got a little bit of spite because he didn't allow. I mean, George didn't allow him to see the mother.
But I mean, like think about the 5 minutes. I don't want to go down this rabbit hole too much, but think about not 5 minutes, but the 2 minutes before that where he was distraught that, of course, the one thing that George was hurt by was the thing that he invented. And also on that same newspaper page, it was saying how automobile deaths were mounting. I think that he was feeling guilt about it, like almost stunned into what have I done? He's like, should I go down? Should I confront, this enemy of mine? And then he felt like, yes, I should. And I'm going to feel good about it. It's what my love would have wanted. That's how I interpret that smile.
Yeah, I think it takes some measure of, I don't want to say pride. Maybe pride. George kind of comes along in this movie. He matures and is definitely a different person by the end of the film. So maybe he's kind of acknowledging that as well.
Certainly that's what the studio was hoping for. It's not the original ending, obviously. Okay, so Patrick, does that answer your question? I'd like to move on.
Yeah, well, I would have liked him to be a little bit more of a dick, but okay, fine. If you wanted to be a nice guy, that's fine. But this guy wasn't a nice guy, So I was like, oh, he's going to see him in the hospital and he got his comeuppance finally.
Those tacked on scenes at the end, you have to be careful with them too, because I almost don't count them as part of the movie. As far as I'm concerned, so it's tricky. Speaking of, let's talk about the most controversial and heated topic of the evening, out of any topic, but it's one of the performances, and that is Agnes Moorehead as Aunt Fanny, who was the sole Oscar nominee amongst the cast. The audience in my screening in December hated her, and she thought she was way over the top. George, from our 1942 in Review show that Davie knows, named her unquestionably the best supporting actress of 1942. I personally think it's a bold, intentional performance that was appropriate to the character. The choice was to be over the top. She was an emotional, lonely spinster with a life full of regrets and self-confidence issues, which pretty much describe half the women I've dated. I've seen that type of behavior before. It rang true for me. Davie?
I think it's a great performance.
I ask you about this woman every time. Do you now remember Agnes Moorehead? She comes up all the time.
He does. No, this one I got.
Name another movie that we reviewed that she was in.
Oh, shoot. The Canadian one, right?
Johnny Belinda.
Johnny Belinda. Yeah, that's a big one.
That's Agnes. She's also known as the mother from Bewitched.
Yes. I remember this conversation now.
She is a mother from Bewitched.
Patrick just got so excited. He put it all together.
Yeah.
Davie, yes, it was a good performance.
No, it was a great performance. If you don't like that performance, then it's just not your movie. Like, you're not enjoying it. It was perfect. I don't know how it could have been any different and made the movie better in any way. It called for a theatrical, emotional, volatile performance, and she nailed it.
Teresa Wright beat her for Best Supporting Actress. Jim said that was appropriate. That was the right call. George said Agnes Moorehead should have won. I had somebody else altogether. Between the two performances you've seen, who should have won Best Supporting Actress that year?
This one was better.
Okay, there you go. Davie sides with George. Patrick, Agnes Moorehead.
I get why she's in the movie. I get her purpose. There was a couple of scenes in particular that she graded on me. It basically, I get why she told George, that the mother was having this, love affair with a widowed man. So I get why she did that. But then when he came back and he was like, she was like, why did you go and tell everyone? And she kind of like flipped the story on him. She became weak and not manipulative. And it just felt like, I don't know, it felt a little bit too much of a turn. Like she went too deep into this weeping shell of a person when she honestly had a lot of the power in the last scene. From there, her just crying incessantly. I didn't feel like some of her emotions were motivated by what was actually happening within the scene sometimes.
That sounds like a screenplay issue, not necessarily a performance issue. And it almost makes her performance sound better to me because she navigated that. Like, I believed her emotions in the moment. Sounds like your issues are more with the turn the story was taking.
Yes, and maybe she could have, instead of starting with crying, she could have led you towards that.
I would argue, too, that the scene where you interpret her as being strong and manipulative was hollow. I feel like that hysterical woman was always there underneath. And I sensed that within that scene. You thought there was a shift. I sensed that desperate woman billowing beneath.
Well, yes, her desperation was there, always. I mean, she's always jealous of her sister.
She's protective to you. It's her sister-in-law.
That's weird. I thought they were sisters. Okay.
She's Wilbur's sister.
Even still, she's jealous of her, and you can tell. But now she has the ability to make fun of George and to control the situation. She lost control, but that's exactly what she was expecting George to do in the first place, I would suppose, to cause a scene. I'm not sure why the.
Because I feel like she regretted it. Because I feel like, you know, she maybe if she knew what she was doing, that was an impulsive decision that she made to talk to George. I see all this in the performance, the way she played it, and then she like regretted it because it had a much worse impact than she ever could have imagined. She was jealous and she did something stupid in talking to George about it and unleashed a beast to some degree. That's how I interpret some of the choices she made as an actor.
We're different now. I thought she could have ramped it. She just started out like, oh, woe is me. I'm so silly. How could I have done this? She had to know that George is a little bit of a hothead, fighting people since he was 5 years old. You know, what did she expect this guy to do?
Well, I mean, I think she expected him to do something, but I don't think she thought it through. We're going to disagree on that particular thing, but it's another rabbit hole, so we'll let it go. Because I have something that I completely forgot to put in my notes. Jim actually named Dolores Costello as should have been nominated for Best Actress of 1942. George and I actually both disagree. As much we think she's fine, but I don't know if she's Oscar worthy. She's Isabel. Out of all the performances, I think she's, I don't want to say the weakest, but certainly doesn't shine as much. She's an object of affection more than anything else. Do you guys have something quick about Dolores Costello?
I honestly loved her the last scene when she was just like, okay, George, I'll see you later. You know, like she's just a big jerk to. No,
that's Ann Baxter. Dolores Costello's the mother. Isabel.
I never know the people's freaking names, and I think they think these white people look the same. So here's my problem. There's that scene at the end. Was it the mother who went in for the drugs at the end?
No, that's
and then they cut to the mother being sick right after that.
One's 19, the other's 40. How can you mix them up?
After that scene, when she breaks George's heart, she goes into the pharmacy, right? She faints.
She caused Alex at the screening to talk about the history of fainting.
That makes sense. Then the next scene, the mother is sick.
So?
Why is she fainting?
So many side tangents here. The fainting is about her bottling up her love for George. Like she loves George in spite of herself. Everybody agrees that she shouldn't marry George, but she can't help but love him, which she explains in another way. The fainting is she let him go. She put on these airs to him as she said goodbye. And she laughed at him, and inside it was killing her. It was eating her up. And so she goes in the pharmacy feeling lightheaded because of it and then faints. It all tracks to me.
I thought she hated George all the way through. I didn't know how much she cared about George.
What do you think that monologue was all about, the Indian chief monologue?
After I saw the close-ups, which felt was like, whoa, where did they even come up with that close-up in that scene where she's dumping George? I was like, oh, maybe she really does care for him. Okay, that's weird, because I thought that she actually was trying to push George away the whole time, saying, I'll never marry you, I'll never marry you.
So
look, there's clearly lots of good reasons why no one should marry George.
Did you think that was her realizing, like it just hit her all at once and then she fainted?
It's the classic head versus heart. I mean, like anyone with a brain is like, George is bad news. Or he needs some time to grow up. And in our one of our favorite scenes, the carriage ride, she's like, maybe in a few years or something, I'll marry you. Like it'll be years, because she's giving him the opportunity to grow, which he has yet to show signs of. And also, don't forget, George is being a total douche as regarded her father who she adores, and George is like not letting him see his own mom, like real asshole kind of stuff. So yeah, she's gonna give him the cold shoulder, but she doesn't want to. She wishes, she loves him, and she wishes he were different.
That's how I interpreted it. That she, the reason she fainted was because it just took such a toll to pretend when she really did love him, even though she knew she couldn't be with him. When it was over, she just fainted from the strain of it. Patrick, that's an interesting thought. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it just kind of all came down on her at once.
I'm definitely wrong. I know I'm wrong. No. Because of that close-up, she feels something for a second, and then it cuts back to the wide. She goes into the shot. At that point, I was confused because I was liking the fact maybe this is when he gets his comeuppance. Maybe this is when he realizes he's a jerk and he can't be this way to other people, but it wasn't. He just continued to be a jerk throughout the whole film, basically, until the very end. I know I'm not correct. I was a little bit confused at her motivation. And then going forward from there, I was confused by the fact that she's opining about how much she loves this person, but he needs to move away. I don't know, the whole Indian thing.
All this is a good segue. Nobody wants to talk about Dolores Costello, apparently, because everyone thinks she's Ann Baxter, who is a future Oscar winner. She's the future Oscar winner. That in this, since we're on her, I'll just talk about her performance. Who, at the age of 19, shows the maturity of a veteran in this performance. I think mastered a lot of complex emotions. Her love for George, coupled with her knowledge of how absolutely wrong he is about everything. I think the case in point is her story about the Indian chief. I think it's one of the highlights of the movie. Excellently performed, and when you consider the fact that she was 19 years old and sort of new to acting in films, I think it enhances it even further. Davey, anything on Ann Baxter?
That scene that we keep talking about a lot, I don't know if it bumped for me a little bit.
I love it when Davey starts using my phrases, bumps.
Well, the straining of a smile seemed a bit much, but it did get the point across.
Now, when you say it bumped, do you think it was a story bump or the way she actually performed it?
I think the way she actually performed it was just a little bit much for me.
Okay.
It just didn't seem believable that she would plaster it on that hard.
Quick side note, did you recognize Ann Baxter?
No, what was I supposed to recognize it from?
She's Eve from All About Eve.
Oh, Jesus. I didn't put that together, but now that you say it, yeah. That's a great movie, too.
That's a great movie and a great performance. Patrick.
I've talked so much about it, but
Yeah, you thought she was Dolores Costello the whole time.
she was somebody.
Transformed is a transformative performance.
Right. Her performance was sound. My problem is a little bit of a script, I guess. But then that everything up to that point, I was like, okay, she's doing a great job. She's the love interest. She's the level-headed person, and she's trying to keep this kind of monstrous guy at bay without ruining his ego. But then I was like, well, if you don't like the guy, don't like the guy. Don't be conflicted by this whole thing. But that's a writing problem.
So now that we've figured out the identification of some of these people, can you tell me what you think about the mom, Dolores Costello? Because Jim said she should have been nominated for an Oscar.
I liked her ability to be aloof to the sister-in-law. There was this one scene where they're walking through the plant and the sister-in-law was like just laser beams through both of them. How upset about their affection.
For what it's worth, it is before the invention of laser beams.
How do you know? Think about that.
Get Alex on here.
We need Alex to confirm the history of laser beams and fainting.
She was, I wouldn't say great, but I feel like she played that role of a loving mother who's also in this hard situation. And there was a situation, I liked the conversation between George and the mom when she was like, why can't I love this guy? There was a very real moment where she's talking about, I'm not doing anything wrong by loving someone that I love. And that was a great scene too. So I think she had some powerful performances.
She just didn't stand out to me as much. So calling her Oscar-worthy was a surprise to me. It didn't stand out to me as a bad performance. I even forgot to put it in my notes. That's how much I sort of forgot about her in it. Davey, anything on Dolores Costello?
Nah, I'm good.
And that's sort of my point. I think that's sort of my point. That's sort of how I feel about it. Jim was so adamant about her performance that I felt like I should have mentioned it. We've talked so many about performances, but I did want to mention this because Alex called this performance his favorite of the movie. And he's one of these character actors that we talk about. We talk about Ray Collins, who plays the uncle who's a congressman. And Davey, you might recall, he also played Boss Jim Geddes in Citizen Kane. And he played Nicely Johnson in The Big Street and Frederick March's boss at the bank in The Best Years of Our Lives. All of them are so different characters, fully realized by this versatile talent. I think he's great in this movie. He's such an actor's actor. Like, I love watching him, all his little detailed choices. Really smart, and that character had a lot of life to me. Patrick?
This is what I was talking about earlier with those long shots. It's just the two people just having chemistry together. I feel like he played off of the people in some of the scenes that he was in really, really well. I got lost in the film. I really liked his character action.
Davey? Do you remember him as Boss Jim Geddes?
Yeah, the one thing, and he's indicative of this, is if you're going to do those long shots, you got to have the actors to pull it off. And it's a testament really to him and to everyone in the film, really, that it worked as well as it did. Because with lesser actors, I don't think you can really do it that way. I think you need to kind of cut around them.
That's true. And I mean, and these were almost all theater people, except for maybe Ann Baxter, who's sort of new. This was his troupe, you know what I mean? The Mercury Players. That's why we have a lot of the same faces from Citizen Kane. And this was originally a radio production. He did this on radio in the 30s, well before he made it into a film. So a lot of them, not all the same people. No, Walter Houston was in the radio broadcast. But so that's it for performances. We're running out of time, but I guess we wanted to, story is one of the main issues. So I guess we'll talk about it briefly. The main issue that came up with the screenplay is the characterizations. Because as written, the characters, with the possible exception of Lucy, are somewhat two-dimensional and underwritten. And the audience that I had in LA reacted strongly to that and the overall lack of arcs. The RKO version had a tacked-on arc for George at the end, but it's basically behind closed doors and kind of unseen by us. We were told about it, and so it doesn't really count. My argument for the screenplay is that the arc actually belongs to the city of Indianapolis itself, which grows and grows as time passes, making the Morgans into millionaires and the Ambersons into the working class. It's how that change of the city and progress affects the characters. That, to me, is the arc of the screenplay. Does that make sense to anybody?
It does make sense to me. I love that. I love that. So I'm not trying to take away from that. I thought George's arc kind of gelled for me in the scene when he's looking for the job to support his aunt. That, to me, is him taking that step towards maturity. The city, that's an interesting take as far as, you know, that and kind of the development of the automobile in general. There are arcs about in this film, I believe.
Patrick, story was one of your issues as well, and Jim also talked about how the story kept pushing him away.
I always hate to agree with the person who just talked, but I do feel like Davie is making a point that there was a soft arc when he realizes that he should be helping out his aunt. But I do feel like him helping out his aunt let you know that he wasn't mature enough because he went and worked in an
dynamite factory.
The whole thing doesn't make any sense. Like, dude, what are you thinking? He's trying to be selfless, but he just doesn't know.
It's almost incomplete arc to me, too, to some degree, because for George, we never see hints that he's ever getting there. It's sort of
abrupt.
It's abrupt. Thank you. That's exactly what I'm saying. And also, it's caused by desperation. So it's not really his growth, you know what I mean, so much as it is he lost all his money and therefore has to do this sort of thing.
Kinda. Not really. I mean,
walked away from her.
The aunt wants to live in some boarding home, so he's making sacrifices for her own comfort. I don't know if they could live on a lawyer's salary, which I suppose they could, but apparently he wants to try to do something.
Well, he was going to be a clerk, too. He started out as a law clerk. He wasn't just going to become a lawyer.
He went to Harvard. I mean, you just assume that he could be a law clerk and make some type of a living, you know? I don't know.
He didn't study law at Harvard.
How do you know?
He didn't study anything. That was the whole point.
No, what did he say?
I don't know if this quote makes the movie, but the famous quote from the book is, "I'd rather be being things than doing things," which is sort of the attitude of the upper class. That's sort of George's attitude. And so, yeah, he didn't study anything.
It sounded like he was trying to be thoughtful of his aunt's comfort.
Right before that scene, he's like yelling at her. I love cutting to Davie when he's looking at his phone or yawning. I just got a good yawn out of it. If that is supposed to be his arc that we see, it is minute. And I think you qualified it with that, Patrick.
But I bet that's what was cut out.
I believe the original script was supposed to end a little darker with, you know, that there's a pullout where he's praying by the bed and the line is, "George Minifer finally got his comeuppance."
Yeah.
It was supposed to be cut to black.
So they have the script that he used?
They have all his notes, yeah.
So we kind of know what was cut out?
I don't know, but there was a remake. Alfonso Arau directed a remake a few years ago for A&E. They used Orson Welles' original script and notes to make it. We have Patrick on the show so often, we always fail to talk about score, and he's a composer, so I think we need to. Bernard Herrmann is one of the most famous composers of all time. Of course, famously doing Citizen Kane, Vertigo, Psycho, and Taxi Driver are some of his famous scores. He did the music for this film, although he had his name taken off of the film in solidarity with Orson Welles after they recut the film. Bernard Herrmann said he wanted his name taken out of it, but it is his music. So I wanted to see what Patrick had thoughts about the score before we go to the T word.
TBH? Nah, I mean, I didn't really, nothing was like remarkable. There was no theme that I walked away with. But it was kind of interesting because if you listen to some of the stuff in the background of some of these longer takes, longer conversations, it was kind of organ-esque music. And that's the only time that I really perked up and I paid attention to the music. But sometimes when you pay attention to music, it means you're out. I actually was in. I was in this movie. I wasn't really paying attention to a lot of the...
Organ adds to the gothic quality to it. I was hoping you would notice that.
Yeah, it was meandering organ. That's what I noticed. It's not a good thing when I did notice it. I was like, where is this melody going? It's just kind of like soap opera music. When I noticed it, obviously when it's big and it goes with the action, I was like, okay, this is movie music. I mean, that's not what you're supposed to say, but that's what it was. It was more like on action. But then the stuff that I did hear, meandering. So I was like...
So it was okay, it sounds like. You think it was okay, the score?
It didn't bring me out, so that's what the job... I mean, It didn't ruin the movie.
I liked it. I mean, I love Bernard Herrmann, but I did like it. And because he took his name off it, it's hard to find on Pandora and tracks in places because technically his name's not officially associated with the music. All right, so it's time for Davey's least favorite segment, but it's the segment that Patrick has tended to shine in the last couple episodes. What, Patrick, you know the name of the segment?
Theme.
But Davey doesn't like that word. It makes him nervous, so we call it the T word.
Titties!
So this movie has some, I almost feel like they're almost obvious themes. I think even Davey could pick up the biggest theme in this movie. So I'll give Davey a chance here. Davey, what would you say is the biggest theme of the Magnificent Ambersons?
I mean, for me, it's just the march of time, progress.
Progress is right. He got it. Patrick, are you so proud of him? Golf clap. Yeah, progress is the huge thing. And it's interesting is the film actually doesn't come down one way or the other on it. It seems to have mixed feelings about advancement, pros and cons, even more so than the original book. The original book actually tended not to love progress and was very hard on the automobile. In the film, on the one hand, automobiles get mostly a bad rap, but on the other hand, the horse is seen as just as malfunctioning. And on one hand, the modern and progressive Morgans are clearly the more sympathetic bunch, but the film seems to look back on the glory days of the Ambersons with nostalgia. So I'm not sure that the film takes sides here. It merely poses the question of, is progress always good? Is it necessary? Will it happen regardless? That's sort of what I take from this movie. Patrick, what do you think?
Well, the last scene had me taking something completely different. Even if you're the annoying stepsister, if you have patience, you can get the man you want.
They don't end up together. They were just walking down the hallway. They did not.
They were kind of walking like they were about to.
No way. There's no way they get together. Davey, tell them. There's no way they get together.
What was the last line?
He was telling her about the love of his life, which was not her.
No, he was telling her about the fact that the son had reconciled their differences.
Then he said, I'm finally able to connect with the love of my life.
You know what? Oh, shoot. I'm an idiot. That's why the whole ending didn't make sense. Because I was like, is he talking about the stupid stepsister? Like, are you kidding me? This is the stupidest movie I've ever seen. Okay.
That would have been a curveball.
It was a curveball to me. They walk out of the room. They're talking, they're holding hands.
Honestly, practically, and you know how this happens sometimes, because it was a tacked on scene. The only reason that she's in that scene is she was the only other person available. Like, he would have told Ann Baxter if she was available. It was just him and Agnes and Joseph were the only ones that were available that day, and they needed to get it done. So they just crafted the scene around their availability.
You can't be with the one you love.
Right, just wait. You're with somebody.
Love the one you're with. I hope I don't get sued for that. Guys, it's not just progress from a technological point of view. I think also there's social progress involved too. If you think about the way the gossip that keeps Isabel and Eugene apart, both initially and later in life, clearly it's something that the rest of the world has moved past, but George is holding firm to this idea of what people are talking about. They're both widowers. They can get together if they want to get together. It's okay. When you have a town of 10,000 that's soon to become a town of 1 million, gossip means a lot more. But as progress goes on, those social rules are also progressing. That's not necessarily a bad thing.
Right. At the end of the movie, we didn't see as many black servants either. That's progress. It's great. It's great.
Well, they just couldn't afford them because
yes.
last. So I have one other theme, guys, and I mean it probably is a little obvious. And it's definitely it's an offshoot and not as important as the progress theme, but classicism, which is a theme that comes up a lot in a lot of these T-word segments. But this one's a little different. I mean, yes, it does depict the rise of the middle class that tends to bring the upper class down to its level a little bit. But there's an element here that a lot of films don't have, and I touched on it a minute ago. The Ambersons, in all their magnificence, it seems that they meant something symbolically to the people of the city. And I talk about the nostalgia with which they're looked back at, the magnificent Ambersons. As they disappear, they're missed. I feel like it gave this lower class and middle class something to aspire to dream about. Figureheads, as if they were the royalty of Indianapolis. And I think the film also suggests this idolatry can lead to complacency and doesn't necessarily condone the idolatry. I thought it was interesting the way that this rose-colored lens with which they looked at the Ambersons. Patrick, anything on that?
This is what I think about when I think about what you just said. I was watching the film and I thought this could be like a mob movie without the violence. Like Like they were just like a family, you know.
Ambersons, Corleones, you know.
They just ran this town, and then they had a son who didn't know his place in this world, and he was acting out or doing what he wanted. And I could have seen this as like, if their business was crime, this could be a different movie, but the same kind of ideas. I don't think that answers your question.
Not even remotely.
Not even remotely, but I just did want to say that it was just like a classic family story.
But it was about two families, and it was really about their classes and how the social structure sort of shifted towards the Morgans.
Yeah.
It's like an American royalty kind of situation. What kind of plays into it a little bit is I think there's sort of a old money versus new money struggle between Eugene and George.
Which becomes a new money versus no money situation.
Right. Well, and that's how that always, often in plays out, right? Because old money doesn't just kind of sits there, and
especially if you insist on being things and not doing things.
Like anti-car.
If you're anti-progress, you're going to get left behind. I guess it was tying our two themes together. I guess that's sort of true.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, do we really think that he was anti-car? I mean, he looked at this guy skeptically the whole time.
It's a fair question. He dug in about the car because it was Eugene. I think the whole time he was suspicious of Eugene's intentions towards his mother, even while his dad was alive. So he hated a car regardless. Well, it's tough because he hated the car immediately. Like, as soon as Lucy told him cars, he was like, well, that's silly. I think he thought cars were silly, and then he grew to hate.
He already thought the guy was queer or strange, right? He already thought the guy was a little weird.
But I think it was indifference. I think it was mild indifference that became hate. Is that fair?
It is.
And the hate was because of his hate for Eugene. That all works. Okay, I'm going to move on to the classic movie Showdown.
Down.
Now, Patrick, you've never been to any of my screenings, so you have no idea what's about to happen.
No.
Oh, boy. At my screenings is when the vote happens. Movies match up against each other in a NCAA style bracket kind of situation. And so two movies go head to head and people at the screenings vote, and then the winner moves on. Eventually we'd have a winner. Davie will try and explain in his low key way with the rules, which he's going to read in a very monotone way right now.
So the seating criteria varies from bracket to bracket. The films are shown at JB hosted screenings and need to be 15 years old or older. That would be 2003 or older. Voters are eligible to vote if they've seen both films within a 12-month period. Voters must see both films in JB's presence. And JB is ineligible to vote, although he can break ties.
Patrick, is it clear yet? He's got it. So the vote has already happened. It happened at the screening on December 9th of 2017. But you guys will opine, and then I'll reveal who actually won. And so tonight is a bracket that I affectionately call the Best Picture Losers bracket. But it's really it's Best Picture nominees that did not win. Is the nicer way to put it. And so Davie, Magnificent Ambersons is a 7 seed, so it would go up against a.
Is that a 10?
10 seed. 7 seed versus a 10 seed. So it's the second closest possible matchup in this Best Picture Losers bracket. And so here is the matchup: the Magnificent Ambersons, number 7 versus number 10. Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf? Wow, that was a film that I screened as a part of my Oscar movie marathon on February 25th, 2017. Of course, we also talked about it quite a bit in our 1966 in review. We all, Davie, me, and Jay Money, all named it the best film of 1966. So this could be a really interesting vote. Patrick, I don't suppose you've ever seen Mike Nichols' first film, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf?
Sorry, I haven't seen it.
I meant to tell you to watch it as well, but I forgot to do that. But Davie's seen it, so this is going to be a really interesting thing. Davie, what would you have chosen?
Oh, that's hard.
They're good when they're hard, right?
Probably have to go with Magnificent Ambersons. I would go with that. I wouldn't argue with someone if they went with Virginia Woolf. Virginia Woolf's, I think, a great movie. Some powerhouse performances in that. But this is, I think, is more of the complete package as far as filmmaking. That's where I fall on it.
Magnificent Ambersons. Well, you'll find out what about me, because actually at the screening, it ended up in a tie. And Davie, what happens when there's a tie?
It means you got to break the tie.
I got to break the tie. So I had to break the tie. And so you'll find out when I reveal the winner what I chose. Before I do, though, I want to explain, because it got pretty heated. And Davie already alluded to how close it was for him. And luckily, Davie sounds like he will not be angry either way. So that's kind of a positive.
Sometimes I get angry, but not this one.
Just sometimes. And Anyway, the people that voted for Magnificent Ambersons felt that the misanthropic and pessimistic nature of Virginia Woolf was a turnoff. They felt trapped inside that world and it was uncomfortable. They felt the Morgans in the Magnificent Ambersons were people that they could root for, where there was no one to root for in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. They also felt the Magnificent Ambersons were tighter, more engaging, and with greater craftsmanship. Sort of similar to what Davie just said, at least as far as the craftsmanship is concerned. The people that liked Virginia Woolf said they embraced the darkness of it. It didn't feel good, but it felt more important, almost existential. They also appreciated the elegance of the writing of Virginia Woolf. That was the back and forth that was happening, and they were pretty adamant, both sides, and so it was interesting, and it was pretty split. But here is the winner based on my tiebreaker. Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf moves on to the second round of this particular bracket. And it was close for me as well. I would say the complex characters and allegorical situations of Virginia Woolf felt slightly more impactful to me. Additionally, the performances, Davie, as you mentioned, are otherworldly. Some of the best I've ever seen. Fully realized people, very challenging stuff that those four actors knock out of the park. And quite frankly, I think Orson Welles would have loved to get his hands on this play. And there's a lot in common between Mike Nichols and Orson Welles in terms of the past of their careers. But that's the one I chose. Davie, reactions?
I'll let you have it.
I'll be able to sleep tonight. Any interest in watching Virginia Woolf? We all named it the best film of 1966.
No, I actually like doing this stuff because you give me movies that I probably wouldn't have watched except for Mission Impossible.
You would have watched that one, yeah. The thing about Virginia, I just rewatched Virginia Woolf, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, just cuts. Like, and maybe that's another factor, the rewatchability. I mean, I just sort of just wanted to. Like, it came up in a conversation not too long ago. I don't remember what it was, on one of the shows, and I'm like, I just want to watch it again. Like, it's been over a year and a half since I've seen it, and I just wanted to. It was, and it was compelling and amazing again. So I'm glad I made that choice. It was so close, though. Honestly, I had to look it up to see what I chose. I did not remember. That's how close it was. Speaking of close, it is time for closing thoughts. Time to finally wrap things up. Patrick.
I really liked at the end of this movie how Orson Welles went through each of the key personnel heads of the movie, giving the assistant director a shout out. I watched that and I was like, I know you are a director and you are a writer, but you're also an amazing AD. And I said, I've never heard an AD get a shout out in any type of prominent form like that. And I said, maybe that's why JP loves this film so much. But no, it also was a great film as well. But I really did like that. But what was weird about the end was those weird actor portraits where they're kind of looking weirdly off camera. Do you remember those at the end?
That whole segment comes from the radio background. Like, that's sort of the way they would close out radio shows, by going through the roll of the credits. They would vocally speak them. And so Orson Welles sort of brought that back. It's a very famous element to the Magnificent Ambersons that we didn't have time to talk about. Glad you brought it up. It is sort of a famous thing about the movie.
It's great. I liked it.
Davie, closing thoughts?
It's funny that Patrick brought that up when he shouts out the AD by name like that. My reaction was, that's dumb. Who cares? I'm kidding.
Patrick, he doesn't even know what an AD does, so.
No. I was always reluctant to watch this because I knew that Orson Welles had been wronged, but I ended up liking it a lot. So I'm, there's one other movie out there that I just have never watched for the same reason. It's Major Dundee. Maybe I'll go back and watch that. That's one that's pretty famous for Peckinpah washed his hands of it after they took it away from him.
You know who directed that final scene in Magnificent Ambersons when Orson Welles was in Brazil?
Who was it?
Don't say it was AD.
The AD!
Oh, God. Oh. I just gave him props for promoting the AD, and the AD goes and stabs him in the back.
Bring it a full circle. It's funny, Patrick, through all the shout-outs, didn't you notice that they did not mention a composer?
First off, I was all like, when it got to AD, I was like, holy shit. That's never happened before, ever.
All right, so guys, our next classic is going to be in October, and we're going to do one of the biggest box office hits of all time that was #1 on a recent top 5 I did on the most recent Sound Off in episode 51.4. So you have to go back and see what my #1 was, and that's the movie we're doing in the next classic. Our next show, however, is a sound off, and that's coming up in just a few days. It'll be our 36th sound off, and we're going to bring back the movie game, much to Davey's delight and you, the audience. I'm going to do What's Their Bucket, which is our segment that spotlights character actors. And based on our review of Magnificent Ambersons, which won the Pulitzer Prize, I'm going to do my top 5 films that were adapted from Pulitzer Prize-winning works. That's coming up on just this upcoming Monday. And you guys have anything else you want to say to the audience?
Have a good night.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming back. Those are my guys, and ladies and gentlemen, this meeting of the No Name Cinema Society is adjourned.